Today we will continue to learn about compound probability, and we are going to focus on the types of events that we can have with compound probability. These types are independent and dependent events. If you look at your notes on page 27, you'll see the top that says sometimes we need to find the probability of two or more events occurring. Whenever we are finding probability of more than one event, this is called a compound event. There are two types of compound events, independent and dependent. An independent event is when the outcome of one event does not affect the outcome of another. So here are some examples. Rolling two dice. This is considered an independent event because if I roll one die, what I land on the first die has absolutely no effect on what I could possibly land on for my second die. Another example is rolling a die and pulling a card. Whatever I roll on my first die has no effect on the card that I pull. The next example is spinning a 5-sectioned spinner 3 times in a row. Every time I spin that spinner, I have the same 5 options. So since none of those options have changed, this is considered an independent event because whatever I landed on the first time will not affect what I land on the second time. Now let's look at dependent events. Is when the outcome of one event does affect the outcome of the other. So my first example here is picking a card, not replacing it, and then picking another. In this problem, I would start with 52 cards, but if I took a card out and I did not put it back in the deck, and then I chose another, then now that card is missing from my deck. So there is one outcome that is not there, and there is one fewer card total in the sample space. Another example of a dependent event is choosing a piece of candy out of a jar, eating it, and then choosing another piece of candy. If you eat the piece of candy out of the jar that you've chose first, then that makes one fewer choice in your jar. So it affects the outcomes for the next choice. Let's look at some examples. We want to determine whether each situation is an independent or a dependent event. The first one says Josiah has a bag of assorted jelly beans. He pulls one out, puts it back, and then pulls out another one. This would be an independent event because even though he pulled one out, he returned it. So what he did first will have no effect on what he does next because all of the outcomes that he started with are still in the bag. Our next one says Lena flips a coin and rolls a die. This is also an independent event because whatever Lena flips on her coin will have no effect on the number of outcomes on our die. Next, I see Kiera randomly draws a card from a deck of cards. Without putting it back, she draws another card. Well, this is going to be a dependent event. This is because Kiera kept that card out. So now when she goes to choose another card, there is one fewer card in her sample space and one fewer option for her to choose. Now I want you to try the next 3. Our next problem says at a grocery store, Grace is picking out a frozen pizza. Meanwhile, at another store across town, Ellie is also picking out a frozen pizza. These are actually independent events because when Grace picks out her frozen pizza at a grocery store, it does not affect the number of pizzas that Ellie can pick out because Ellie is at a different store. If they had been at the same store, then this would have been a dependent event because Grace would have chosen a pizza that was Ellie's. Our next problem says students are drawing numbers out of a hat to decide the order in which they will present their projects. Zach draws first and Sierra draws second. Well, for this problem, this is considered a dependent event because whichever number Zach draws is no longer available for Sierra to draw. This means that whatever Zach drew will affect what Sierra chooses. Our last one says Grant has a 4-sectioned spinner and he spins it twice in a row. This is an independent event because whatever Grant landed on first will not change the outcomes for the second spin. So there are still 4 spins no matter what he chose first.